around, but also some showery bursts, especially across parts of Scotland. Temperatures not dropping a huge amount. In fact, in the southeast, it is going to be another warm night, some places only falling to lows of around 17 or 18 Celsius. As we go through tomorrow morning, though, there will be some hefty rain across the far east of Scotland and the Northern Isles. Also, plenty of showers feeding into western parts of Scotland. In between, something a little bit dry and brighter for some, but also more showers across Northern Ireland, some parts of northern, northwestern England, and in fact, down the western side of England and Wales, there'll be some showers feeding in. Something a little bit drier and sunnier for more central eastern parts of England, although in the far southeast, that front will be lingering here for a time, so a grey, damp start to the day for some before that front clears away by the afternoon. Behind it, for many, it is going to be a showery day, and some of those showers will be heavy, and there are some gusty, blustery winds to watch out for too, especially in the northwest, making it feel a little bit cooler for some, but there will also be some sunny spells, and in the east-southeast, in the sunshine, feeling quite warm with temperatures in the low to mid-20s. Wednesday gets off to a fine start for many of us, but some very wet and windy weather is going to feed in from the northwest as we go through the day, particularly affecting Scotland and perhaps Northern Ireland too. Now, the rain is going to be quite heavy and will last as we go into Thursday, and it's all due to the remnants of what was Hurricane Ernesto, the other side of the Atlantic. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We could be calling you with the news that you've won our latest Great British giveaway, an incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash.
Hi, I'm John from sunny North Yorkshire, and I've just won £20,000 in the GBNews Great British giveaway. It didn't cost much to enter, but of course if you're not in, you can't win. And here I am, having won £20,000, and that's tax-free, so I'm rather pleased I did it.
For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes,
she could have said Stump. You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Arlene Foster on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Emily Carver. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, live from God's own county of Somerset on State of the Nation tonight. The Labour Party, the self-purported party of service, has shown its true colours of cronyism. News this weekend has revealed that cabinet ministers received nearly £500,000 from the unions before offering them massive pay rises. Meanwhile, has the Home Office breached international and domestic law by referring to more than 1,000 people who were arrested as criminals, potentially breaching the right to the presumption of innocence? The Labour Party's obsession with the workers' right to be an idler could lead to the end of the office party, not to mention the risk that the policy could cost firms thousands in compensation claims. There'll be much more to get into than all that, and just remember, in Somerset, where the sun shines brighter, the television is also twice as invigorating as anywhere else. Somerset refreshes the part other counties cannot reach. State of the Nation starts now. Holding the State of the Nation flabellum for this evening is the Telegraph columnist and restaurant critic, friend of the programme, William Sitwell. As ever, I always want to know what you think. Send in those mailmogs, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's one of your favourite parts of the day, the News Bulletin with Sophia Wensler.
Jacob, thank you. Good evening from the GB Newsroom. It's just gone 8 o'clock. Your top story this hour. British tech tycoon Mike Lynch and his daughter are among 6 tourists missing after a luxury yacht sank in a tornado off the coast of Sicily. The British-registered 56-metre Bayesian had 22 people on board when it went down after being struck by the tornado. A body believed to be that of the vessel's cook has been found. Divers are now combing the waters as search efforts continue around the wreck, 50 metres underwater. So far, 15 people have been rescued, including the wife of Mike Lynch and a 1-year-old girl. In the US has called on Hamas to agree to a bridging proposal for a ceasefire in Gaza after it gained the backing of Israel. Earlier, the US Secretary of State said the latest push for a deal was probably the best and possibly the last opportunity, urging both sides towards agreement. Speaking after a meeting with Israel's Prime Minister, Antony Blinken said Benjamin Netanyahu had agreed with the proposal, which would lead to a ceasefire and see the return of Israeli hostages. Back in the UK, in Manchester, a 43-year-old woman has died and 2 others are in a critical condition following a triple stabbing. A 22-year-old man believed to be known to the victims has been arrested on suspicion of murder. Greater Manchester Police are appealing for witnesses as they continue their investigation into what they say is an isolated incident. Meanwhile, there'll be no punishment for anyone handing zombie knives and machetes into police stations ahead of a new ban. Restrictions come in next month. The government stopped short of making ninja swords illegal, but insists that will happen soon. Policing Minister Dame Diana Johnson says the public should do the right thing and surrender any dangerous weapons. Meanwhile, Prisons Minister Lord Timpson claims he's inherited a justice system in crisis as plans to address overcrowding in jails are activated in northern England. Operation Early Dawn will see defendants who are remanded in custody waiting for a court appearance held in police cells for longer. It's separate to the early release scheme for some offenders, which kicks in next month too. More than half of people think Britain's heading in the wrong direction, as an opinion poll suggests a drop in support for the new Labour government. An equal percentage of adults have favourable or unfavourable views of Sir Keir Starmer, with 38% on both sides. Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives' ratings, however, haven't changed since the election. And the Tories' deputy chairman, Matthew Vickers, has resigned. He stepped back from the role to support Robert Jenrick as the next Conservative leader. He says Jenrick is the standout candidate with a compelling vision for rebuilding the party. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophia Wensler. More in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. This Labour government has revealed its true colours of cronyism. Since 2019, senior Labour politicians now in the Cabinet collectively received nearly £500,000 in campaign donations from the unions. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, received more than £14,000 in support from unions since 2019. Louise Haigh, the Transport Secretary, has received more than £24,000. The Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, and the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, have received donations too. In fact, of the more than 400 Labour MPs, more than half of them took money and cash or kind since the election was called, which totalled nearly £2 million. Now, you may wonder, why does this matter? Political parties take donations from various institutions all the time, and it's surely better that they're funded by outsiders rather than by you, the taxpayer. But since the Labour Party has got into office, what has it been up to since the 4th of July? Well, it's been taking money from Tory voters and giving it to Labour voters, especially in the public sector unions. It began with a heartless scrapping of the winter fuel allowance, something which was received by pensioners and who, of course, disproportionately vote Conservative. But what followed has been a series of inflation-busting pay rises for the unions in the public sector. Teachers and nurses are set to receive a 5.5% pay rise, while prison service workers and senior NHS managers will see their pay increased by 5%. Train drivers have been given a whopping 14% pay rise over 3 years, and the largest by a country mile has been given to the junior doctors, 22%. And remember, inflation is back on target at a little over 2%. So the unions give millions to the Labour Party, which then takes billions from you, the taxpayer, to repay their puppet masters. This is a cynical transaction, a quid pro quo, where the funds from unions are effectively repaid by you 1,000 times over. Ever since Sir Keir Starmer was elected Prime Minister, he has tried to maintain that the grown-ups are back in charge, that the dodgy Tories have been ousted, and that the morally superior Labour Party has been restored to its rightful place. Again and again we hear him say that he is restoring governance as a form of service, but he is merely returning to Labour's old ways. Starmer could happily quote Emmanuel Shinwell, who said, "We know that the organised workers of the country are our friends. As for the rest, they don't matter a tinker's cuss." As ever, let me know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. Well, I'm delighted now to be joined by the political commentator, Matthew Stadlen. Matthew, thank you very much for joining me. No one else is worth a tinker's cuss. If you're not a Labour unionist, you're not going to get a look in at all in this government.
Relatives in Oxfordshire, the beautiful county of Oxfordshire, which I think gives your county of Somerset a run for its money. Can we start on a note of agreement and agree that our country is a beautiful place?
We can certainly agree on that. That's a good starting point. We can then discuss which county is the finest. But let's try and get to the issue around Labour having taken over. If you quote another 1940s cabinet minister, or slightly misquote him, the "we are the masters now" seems to be the approach that is being taken. We're going to back our friends, but if you're not one of our friends, you're not getting a look in.
No, I disagree with that very strongly, Jacob, and not perhaps just because you'd expect me to disagree with you, but because the Conservatives, I would argue, ran the country into the ground, ran public services into the ground over the course of 14 years in power. And what Labour is desperately trying to do, I think so far in a relatively, to use your phrase, grown-up fashion, is to try to get things back up and running. And that includes, of course, the National Health Service, which we, or the vast majority of us, certainly I do, rely on to keep us well, keep us healthy, keep us alive, but also the railways. And as a Conservative, you'll be aware that if you have strike after strike on the national railways, you are going to have an economy that starts to grind to a halt. None of these decisions are easy. And by the way, I have a huge amount of sympathy for those pensioners who are just above that cut-off line, who I think will suffer this winter. And we've heard only today, in fact, that energy prices are going to rise during the autumn, and I would ask the Labour government to look again at that. But this is a false choice, I think, the idea that the Conservatives have been pitting pensioners against train drivers, against people who make our railways work. And I think you know what you're up to there.
I understand why you'd say that, but your point on the pensioners who are just above the pension credit limit is surely absolutely the right one, that of the 10 million pensioners who are going to lose, many of them are in that position. And as you know, by and large, pensioners are more likely to vote Conservative than other age groups. And giving a whopping pay rise to train drivers, who are very well paid anyway, as a consequence of their strike action, is back to the 1970s.
I think it depends, Jacob, on how you look at it. Don't forget, for a start, these train drivers have suffered in their pay, like many of the rest of us, it's absolutely true, in recent years. The cost of living is crippling for people. I experience it myself. I'm relatively fortunate in my life, but last week I had to pay a £1,700 bill for relatively minor car repairs. There are lots of people in this country who really struggle to pay those sorts of one-off payments. Train drivers are no different. We have to get the country working again. We cannot anymore afford to have strike after strike, because if the economy shrinks, if the economy struggles, if the economy above all doesn't grow, then the pot for all of us, out of which we pay pensioners who, yes, are vulnerable, that pot shrinks. That's basic Conservative economics that I would have thought you'd sign up to.
Yes, of course you've got to try to grow the economy, but if you pay the Danegeld, the Dane doesn't go away. And that showing that unions who strike do really well, and the more aggressively you strike and the more damage you do, the better off you will be, is absolutely the wrong lesson. I mean, the nurses did a deal with the last Conservative government. They went back to work. The junior doctors are now getting more than the nurses got. What lesson does that teach the nurses, that they should be more militant?
Well, I hope that isn't the lesson that it will teach nurses, because like you, Jacob, I believe that nurses go into relatively poorly paid jobs, lots of them, certainly to start with, because they want to do good in society. They want to look after my family, the family of many, many viewers who are watching today. I don't know whether you have private health yourself or not, but I believe in our nurses, and I think it was right that they were paid properly. So you can look at all of these things from two different sides, and I would question your premise at the beginning in your monologue, because you're trying to suggest that Labour, and I think you've been very cynical in this, if I may say so, you're trying to suggest that somehow Labour are in the pockets of these unions and they're trying to reward their mates.
Yes.
I mean, you'd have to get up various secretaries of state, put that to them in person.
You're absolutely right. I'm not trying to suggest this. I'm saying this. It seems to be absolutely clear. And for the record, yes, I do use private health, but the private health sector also employs nurses who get paid similar amounts in the private as in the public sector. Thank you very much, Matthew. But with me now is the State of the Nation flabellum holder and Telegraph columnist and restaurant critic, William Sitwell. If you go on strike in the public sector, you will now get a good pay deal. The train drivers are extremely well paid. Matthew was talking about the cost of living crisis, but actually we know that hits those on the lowest incomes most. It hasn't particularly hit the train drivers.
Yeah, and if you provide these no strings attached pay offers, you're going to find other public sector workers chasing the same pay increases. I think what's very interesting about this Labour government is that in these early weeks of its new administration, it's behaving like a left-wing government.
And in a way, if you're a Conservative supporter or indeed an observer of politics, we haven't seen a kind of left-wing socialist Labour government. I wouldn't think you could even describe the Blair era as that. And so Conservatives, when they talk about the ghoulish aspects of Labour getting in, this is now you see what happens when a Tory government doesn't behave like a Tory government and allows a proper Labour government to get into power.
Well, I think this is very interesting because I think many people thought in July that Keir Starmer was Tony Blair Mark II. And Tony Blair, when he got in, carried on governing essentially as a left-wing Tory rather than as a socialist. Keir Starmer hasn't done this. He has governed as a socialist. And, of course, that's what he stood as. But he implied something rather different, I think, in his election campaign.
He did, but as
we knew during the election campaign, Starmer's Labour would do anything they could do and basically say very little in order to get into power. And, you know, they are doing what socialist governments do. And we say all along, you swell the public sector, you target free enterprise, you're anti-capitalism, and you raise taxes. And this is what's happening. And I think it's good news for Tories because they can regroup and discover what it is that their true value and their true meaning needs to be.
And it may also help us restore trust, because it turns out that what we said to people in the election was true, that you would get a government in the pocket of unions, you would get a left-wing government, which of course with Tony Blair turned out not to be true because he stuck to Tory spending plans for the first couple of years.
Yes, I mean, we are now seeing the ideology come through, and it's very interesting seeing Rachel Reeves, you know, fiddling with the figures in order to come up with this 20 billion black hole. You're not going to get civil servants complaining about it. No one in the Treasury will ever complain about a government who is a tax-raising government because they want revenue in. Every department across Whitehall has been told by their ministers to, you know, find black holes, prepare for tax increases. So it's good news for civil servants. So it's going to take a while, I think, for Tories to really start, on this long march uphill to try and convince people as to the realities of what's happening.
Interestingly, Labour's ratings have already started falling, and I think this isn't surprising because you mentioned Rachel Reeves. What she said about the black hole was simply not credible. All the figures show the UK economy is performing better than almost all of other competitors in comparable nations, and that this suggestion that we're in a terrible state lacks fundamental truthfulness.
I mean, I think there's a general
feeling across the media that after 14 years of Tory rule, that the press needs to give Labour, you know, a good, sensible honeymoon period in order to be able to actually give it time, you know, show it some respect, allow it to unleash some policies on the country and to govern. But I think that actually post, 28th of October, that first budget, when they nail their true colours to the mast, when you can actually see in black and white the difference between what they promised and what they're delivering, I think the press will start to really go for them. And I think that'll be very interesting to watch.
The great sucking sound of wealth being taken from the private sector and given to their union mates. Well, in a moment, I'll be looking at the possibility that the Home Office is in fact prejudicing trials, broken the contempt of court rules by saying that 1,000 people who have been arrested are criminals.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Sarah, welcome to the show. Obviously, you work for a tobacco company, so a little caveat there to slip in. Nevertheless, it's no surprise that the illegal market is growing so much. When you look at the cost of cigarettes in Britain, huge amounts of duty, and oftentimes, of course, criminality always finds its way into the system. Tell us more about your report.
Absolutely. I mean, up to 90% of a packet of cigarettes is tax. And in the last year, there's been 2 tax increases that have equated more to the last 3 years combined. So now, if you're a roll-your-own smoker, a 30-gram pouch of roll-your-own will cost £22.50, but you can buy a counterfeit pack of 50 grams for £3. So there's a massive disparity. A lot of illegal tobacco is imported, but we do also have a problem in the UK with illegal tobacco factories. So in the last month, there's been an illegal tobacco factory in Gateshead, in Bury, busted, producing roll-your-own tobacco. And on the 12th of July this month, West Midlands gang illegal tobacco factory, the gang was found guilty of producing illegal tobacco, and that was more than £5 million lost tax revenue to the government. And actually, all of those people found guilty got a suspended sentence.
And how does that work? They're literally importing container loads of raw tobacco and packaging it up in factories in Britain, and they're using what appears to be British packaging illegally?
Yeah, some of it is branded packaging, so some of it isn't the kind of unbranded packaging we'd see on cigarettes and roll-your-own now, but it's relatively simple to reproduce, especially RYO. Our own pack swap data now shows that about 50% of the roll-your-own market is illegal tobacco.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, we've been discussing Labour and its union chums and its cronyism, and you've been sending in your mailmogs, but I've got a special guest to read them out, as is traditional when I'm broadcasting from Somerset, in the form of my daughter Mary. Mary, what's come in on the mailmogs?
Well, Jerry says, Jacob, splendid to hear that you still have fire in your belly for the political fray. And I'm surely not the only viewer who believes that you have every chance of re-entering the Commons in the next cohort in 5 years' time, as a Reform candidate.
Not sure about that one.
Alan says, if Labour is going to make misogyny a hate crime, then surely in the interests of equality, they must also make misandry one too.
Oh, that's a very fair point, yes. I'm not sure they'll do that.
Peter says, should I be scared of Kim Jong-Starmer?
Oh, that's very good. Kim Jong-Starmer. I'd be very scared. And talking of being scared, the Home Office perhaps should be worried because it has posted on Twitter that more than 1,000 arrests have been made related to recent public disorder. Seems fair enough. In a graphic, the department stated these criminals will face the full force of the law. But to refer to those arrested as criminals undermines the basic presumption of innocence, fundamental principle of our justice system. Furthermore, it's clear that this government is heavily in favour of the European Convention on Human Rights, and under Article 6 of the Convention, it states that everyone charged with a criminal offence shall be presumed innocent until proved guilty. So is the Home Office not only breaking domestic law, but international law too? Well, with me now to discuss this is barrister and writer Stephen Barrett. Stephen, absolutely delighted as always to be joined by you. This is quite an interesting tweet by the Home Office, isn't it, that they have decided that the people who have arrested are already guilty, and there must be a risk that that prejudices their trials because when they come up in front of a jury, the jurors will know that the government's already said they're guilty.
Yes, well, Lord Hennessy has banged on for quite a while about the death of the good chap constitution, and this is really one of the final nails in its coffin. What on earth the Home Office thinks it's doing, becoming partisan in this way, becoming performatively political, and decrying two fundamental constitutional principles. The first being the presumption of innocence, and the second being that everybody has the right to a fair trial. As a reminder, Jacob, it's in the ECHR because during World War II, I'm afraid our friends in Europe forgot the principle of a fair trial, and they did some really quite monstrous, wicked and evil things. And after the Second World War, we put it in there in order to remind them of how you behave in order to avoid doing monstrous, evil and wicked things. And why are we now going down this path? Having had the concept of a fair trial for as long as we've had it, far longer than the ECHR, it always irritates me, the idea that we actually gain anything from this document substantively as law. We don't. They all exist and pre-exist the creation of the document as English legal principles. But what on earth the Home Secretary thinks it's doing? Now, I don't want to get too hysterical, Jacob, because we still have the best judges in the world. So that second principle, the idea that nobody's trial should actually be compromised because the Home Secretary and the Home Office have done this, well, I trust our judges to correct it. But it will require corrective action by the judiciary. It will require our judges to deftly avoid this whopping mistake that the Home Secretary has made. And it really, if that's where we're going, if everybody who is arrested of a crime is automatically to be decried as a criminal, we will end up in a very dark and dangerous place.
Stephen, I think it's important to establish why this is important, because the presumption of innocence is there because if you're arrested, you have all the forces of the state lined up against you, that the police are paid by the state, the courts are paid by the state, the Crown Prosecution Service is paid for by the state. And if you don't have that thin thread protecting you, then there is the risk that innocent people will be unjustly incarcerated. And using this extra power of the state to declare people guilty before their trial is therefore an important abuse, isn't it? This isn't just nitpicking.
No, this is trial by media. This is everything that every single person who says they are committed to the justice system should oppose. I mean, it should be in the very fibre of our being that we don't believe in trial by media, we don't believe in witch hunts, we believe in fair justice as a proper principle. We believe that people are presumed innocent until found guilty. And humans learn this lesson, Jacob, several times in our history. And every time we relearn it, it's because without this principle, society becomes incredibly brittle, incredibly ugly. I mean, it's not that long ago that we burnt people alive as witches. You know, we did do this. We have been down this path before, and we discovered this idea of the right to a fair trial, which we put inside the ECHR so that everybody in Europe will know this idea. It's obviously not working terribly well. One of the points about the ECHR membership is you have to question its efficacy, not just its intentions, but whether it's actually working. But this is a major blunder by the Home Office. It's not something I would ever have expected to see. It's not party political in any way. It's got nothing to do with whom the Home Secretary is. But what on earth they think, and to be balanced, Jacob, balance is not impartiality, but I'm not going to bore you with details, but to be balanced, when we had the riots in 2011, we also had a disproportionate and OTT response by the government, and the Court of Appeal after a while pointed that out. It does look to be as though they've largely lost their heads again. But deleting this tweet and restating the principle that everybody is innocent until proven guilty could well redeem the Home Office from this massive unforced error into which it has blundered.
And is there a defence for the Home Office to say that they haven't mentioned any individual criminal? This is just generically that 1,000 people have been arrested, some of them may well be guilty, almost certainly are, and that therefore they've just applied it to those who do turn out to be guilty rather than to everyone who's been arrested?
It's a weasel's defence, Jacob. It does make the job, as I said, our excellent judges will correct this. And so it does make the job of our excellent judges easier in correcting this. But it just shouldn't have happened at all. I mean, they're not even, they're supposed to be distant from prosecution. And our relationship with criminal law has really got a bit out of whack of recent. You know, we have the King brings every prosecution in his own name, or when it was Her Majesty, the Queen brought prosecutions in her own name, because it's not about victims. It's not about two members of our society trying to use the criminal justice system to argue about which one wins and which one did something wrong and which didn't. Criminal law is different in that it's a crime against the state. It's against us all. It's that we all have buy-in into the King's peace. We all share in one country. And when one of us commits a crime, we all buy into that. We're all hurt by that crime. And that's a very specific and particular thing, different from my type of law, which is private law, which is two people trying to prove which one of them's right and which one of them's wrong. This is a much more of a recognition of us as a nation, much more of a recognition of us as a state and as one body who are collectively harmed. And the other principle, Jacob, that will go if we fall down this path is the one that Christ talked about, the one that after Bronze Age religion, most of the successful religions, so not just Christianity, most of the successful religions discovered the idea of forgiveness. Because, of course, being a criminal isn't inherently, it doesn't damn you forever. You can repent, you can come back, you can be forgiven, you can be redeemed. And we're almost losing that idea, and it's becoming very selective, Jacob, because I do point out, and it's a terribly minor offence, it was only ever speeding, and it's a total technicality, but our Archbishop of Canterbury is a convicted criminal, and yet we don't seem to care about that. So maybe, you know, let's go back to redemption, let's go back to the ideas that we had to rediscover last time when we went down this path, but the Home Office has made a totally unforced error with this, and it'll lead us to a very dark place indeed.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen. It'll be interesting to see if the judges do come to the rescue, and let's hope that speeding doesn't rule people out of public life, otherwise there wouldn't be many left. Coming up, amidst new legislative changes from the Labour government, could we be facing the end of the office party as we know it? Find out in a moment.
Hello, very good evening to you. Here's your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Plenty of showers as we go through tomorrow and some blustery, gusty winds too. But before then, there's a lot of cloud, there's a lot of rain because of a frontal system that's already made its way in from the west. And as we go through the next 12 hours or so, it's going to continue to push east and southeastwards, bringing quite a wet story across many parts of England and Wales for a time, with that rain feeding into the southeast as we go through the early hours of tomorrow morning. Behind it, there will be some clear skies around, but also some showery bursts, especially across parts of Scotland. Temperatures not dropping a huge amount. In fact, in the southeast, it is going to be another warm night, some places only falling to lows of around 17 or 18 Celsius. As we go through tomorrow morning, though, there will be some hefty rain across the far east of Scotland and the Northern Isles. Also, plenty of showers feeding into western parts of Scotland. In between, something a little bit dry and brighter for some, but also more showers across Northern Ireland, some parts of northern, northwestern England, and in fact, down the western side of England and Wales, there'll be some showers feeding in. Something a little bit drier and sunnier for more central eastern parts of England, although in the far southeast, that front will be lingering here for a time, so a grey, damp start to the day for some before that front clears away by the afternoon. Behind it, for many, it is going to be a showery day, and some of those showers will be heavy, and there are some gusty, blustery winds to watch out for too, especially in the northwest, making it feel a little bit cooler for some, but there will also be some sunny spells, and in the east-southeast, in the sunshine, feeling quite warm with temperatures in the low to mid-20s. Wednesday gets off to a fine start for many of us, but some very wet and windy weather is going to feed in from the northwest as we go through the day, particularly affecting Scotland and perhaps Northern Ireland too. Now, the rain is going to be quite heavy and will last as we go into Thursday, and it's all due to the remnants of what was Hurricane Ernesto, the other side of the Atlantic. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Pearce. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes. Thank you for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. We've been talking about the Home Office and the tweet that it put out that said that people were criminals before they'd been tried, and the mailmogs have been steaming in. Marie says, of course Labour is removing benefits for pensioners, as pensioners are of no value to them. What next? Means-tested state pensions. It's going to be a long 5 years. And Philip says, surely the Home Office was merely referring to the general degree of disorder and criminality that we've seen on our streets. Well, I hope that's true, but it's not quite what it said. And I think it's the danger of departments tweeting. And Annie says, surely the Home Office is loving this, having the blob masters back in charge of the blob. Mr. and Mrs. Blobby. Are the days of the office party numbered? Angela Rayner has targeted social events at work amidst plans to ensure that workers are protected from harassment, which is a good and worthy thing to do. The Worker Protection Act was watered down last year because of concerns that employers were being expected to take all reasonable steps and that would be too complicated for firms to implement it. Labour has now announced that the word all will be brought back, will be re-included, and this implication could be the end of office parties as part of the mitigation of all risks. The consumption of alcohol is, of course, something that is a risk, and it's not much of a party without any alcohol, and that's why it's come under scrutiny. But the workers' rights move doesn't stop there. Those who are contacted out of office hours by their employers could be entitled to compensation as Labour plans the right to switch off. Actually, as it wants people working from home, they'll be pretty switched off permanently, as far as I can tell. But I'm joined now by the Telegraph columnist, Tim Stanley. Tim, are you worried that the journalist lunch, having long since passed into the nether distance, that now office parties will have to go to?
Personally, I would be grateful if I never had to go to an office party ever again. And for that, I welcome our temperate masters taking over and imposing this upon us. But I think there is a bigger picture here, Jacob, which is there's a tension, isn't there, between the government on the one hand being all about growth, which is Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, her agenda. But on the other hand, it also wants to deliver something to its base, and particularly its trade union supporters, which is Angela Rayner's agenda, which is about strengthening workers' rights. Because we're going to see an employment rights bill that's not just going to be the stuff about contacting after hours. It's also going to be probably an expansion of the minimum wage. It's going to be banning fire and hire. It's going to be introducing workers' protections much sooner when someone gets employed. Now, each of these measures, I think there's a very good moral case for it. Now, I personally would love it. They sound very good. But there's a tension, isn't there, between saying we're going for growth to get the British economy moving, but also restricting the labour market, introducing new regulations that makes it difficult for people to do business. And I wonder how that tension's going to be resolved and who's going to win the battle.
Well, not only is it a tension, but workers' rights is to some extent a misnomer, because if you're unemployed, you have no rights. The biggest right is actually to be employed. And the harder you make it for employers, the less likely they are going to be to hire people, take that risk, the expense of giving somebody a chance. And therefore, what worries me is that we will see unemployment and economic inactivity rise, which will be very economically damaging.
Of course, the counter-argument is that during austerity under Cameron, etc., there was a kind of a Faustian pact made, which said, we will accept workers having lower wages and less protections, but we'll keep employment relatively high relative to Europe, etc. But of course, the downside 14 years on is that we've lost a lot of ground in terms of our wages. And the argument of people like Angela Rayner is you need to reunionize the economy, use the government to shift power back towards the worker to raise wages, because the current regime whereby we're relatively underpaid and overworked isn't actually working in terms of productivity or people's happiness.
But Tim, we're not underworked. Productivity in this country, in the public sector, productivity is lower than it was in 1997. All these people in the public sector are working from home. The Daily Mail did an expose of quite how many people are working from home currently. There's low productivity, there's idleness in the public sector, and if you give them more rights and stronger union protections, the only body that will be able to employ anybody will be the state. It'll be the only body that can afford it.
Oh gosh, that's a bit of an exaggeration, Jacob. As you well know, every time a new regulation has been introduced, such as the minimum wage, the Conservatives have said this is going to destroy the labour market. The result has been quite the opposite. We still operate full employment with a minimum wage. The argument of Rayner et al. Is that the working practices have changed and the regulation has not kept pace with it, such that employers can now contact people outside of work. but we've not updated people's rights to protect them from being invaded while they're outside of work. The problem, as I say, that the problem I have with this is the economic argument, that the economy is currently stagnant. We need to grow, we need to innovate. And if you have restrictive workers' practices, isn't that going to make it difficult? I mean, the classic example is the question of the trains. The future, we all know, is driverless trains. But if the labour market for trains is still being heavily controlled by the unions, you're going to continue having very, very well-paid drivers. So there are economic arguments. But I do also see the government's point that regulations have to keep pace with the changing nature of work, and it doesn't automatically crash the economy.
Tim,
rights.
A final thought on this, because it seems to me that it views the economy as it was 50 or 100 years ago, with very strong employers and very weak employees. In every business I've been involved in, actually the employees were essential to the success of the business, and the power was with them, not with the employer. And that this is a very much mass labour 1950s approach to the economy.
And I think they would retort that that is a very much a 1930s employer understanding of workers' relations. That when you have things like net zero hour contracts, where people can be employed or not employed at the drop of a hat, where you have low wages, where you have people working several jobs just to make ends meet, they would say, no, it's time for the state to step in to allow people's rights to catch up so that people have a better share of the pie. And I don't agree with every step the Labour government's taking, but I understand the philosophical argument.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. In a moment, we will be assessing the dramatic decline in the quality and the finances of universities, and we're going to be talking with William Sitwell, who's going to be guiding us through all these complicated and interesting issues and what's happening with coffee houses as well as top priority for the next section.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now, in the UK, King Charles called for, quote, community spirit and compassion following the disorder we've seen on the streets in recent weeks. The King's also thanked the police for their efforts to restore peace, as well as the communities who came out to counter the violence. Joining me now is royal and showbiz reporter Kinsey Schofield. What do you make, first of all, of King Charles and sort of intervening, I guess, on the riots? He's got a bit of stick this side of the pond, because people are saying, well, look, it's OK for you living in your palaces with all your money coming out your ears. You're out of touch, really, with the working class and the concerns of people in this country about, I mean, issues such as migration.
Yeah, I mean, I think in today's polarizing society in both of our countries, being a good leader while trying to avoid politics can feel like navigating a minefield. The King is being very careful and strategic in his reaction. He's emphasizing shared goals, focusing on the common objectives and mission of the community. I mean, he's trying to align everyone around a shared vision that transcends individual differences, and encouraging transparency and open dialogue by allowing everyone to voice their opinions and concerns in a legal and productive way that doesn't jeopardize anyone's safety. And I think you can create a culture of trust where people feel heard and valued. Aside from his family's multiple cancer scares, this is the most difficult period he's had as king, and he is fully aware that the way he responds to this unrest could define him in the history books. But he's in this bizarre position in the sense that his power is limited. In America, we consider the royal family these beautiful, glamorous mascots. You know, they really, truly are so limited in what they're capable of doing over there. So I imagine that there are some concerns in the background, but he's not really in a position to voice them.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. Well, we were talking about workers' rights and the mailmogs have come in. You've been sending them after hours. I'm very impressed. Jack says, soon we'll live in a dystopia in which office parties are a thing only read about in novels and watched in films. And Philip says, what do you make of the claim that leaving the EU destroyed our workers' rights? Well, I wouldn't accept that. I think the EU was taking us down a calamitous route of economic inactivity. And Adam asks, do you ever exercise your right to switch off? Well, dear viewer, please never exercise your right to switch off between 8 and 9, Monday to Thursday, when watching State of the Nation. And no, I'm quite happy to get emails at any time, day or night, and I'm afraid I send them. But the people who work for me always know that they don't have to reply to them when they're sent. It's just you send them when convenient, when you're thinking about something. Well, as I like both coffee and a bun, especially a cream one, I'm usually enthusiastic about new coffee bakeries opening up. And everything I've heard about Gales is positive. Most especially it's annoyed the lefty lovies of Walthamstow, who are trying to keep it off their slightly down at heel high street. So why do they not want new businesses to set up and flourish? Well, to explain what's going on, I'm joined now by State of the Nation's flabellum holder, Telegraph columnist and restaurant critic, William Sitwell. William, what's Walthamstow got against Gales?
Well, Gales has put in for permission to open a branch of its upmarket bakery on Orford Road in the heart of leafy Walthamstow, and a petition has been raised objecting to it on some of the traditional grounds that it actually could damage independent business, which I understand. But what's more eye-catching, the headline-grabbing thing, which was a fundamentally important part of this petition, is that the people who are supporting this petition didn't approve of the chairman of Gales, Luke Johnson, because they don't like his political views. And the idea being that if you have political views that don't chime with your potential customers, you shouldn't have the right to open up a bakery. And they make the point that it's a Labour stronghold. I think Stella Creasy increased her majority at the last election. It was a part of London that voted strongly to remain, all of which goes against the conservative entrepreneurial instincts of Luke Johnson.
Well, Luke Johnson is a very successful serial entrepreneur, done an enormous amount for the British economy. But if people don't like his political views, they don't have to go and buy his buns, do they?
I wouldn't even say that. I would say that why on earth wouldn't you buy someone's buns because you don't approve of their politics? I think it's very dangerous. It's sort of like fascism, the idea that you can only buy someone's buns or someone is only welcome onto your street if they have a particular kind of politics. I mean, if I went into our local wonderful deli in the town of Wiveliscombe, where I live in West Somerset, which is an even more beautiful part of Somerset than the part that you're in, and I said to the lady behind the counter before I bought a quiche, listen, I love the look of your ham and cheese quiche, and it looks fresh and delicious, and the pastry looks good. But listen, I need to know, where do you stand on the prospective imposition on VAT on prep schools? And if she, depending upon her view, I might not feel, comfortable to buy that quiche. This is not a way to run a business. How your croissants are made, the kind of butter that's in it, that's what's important about buying a croissant.
I think people are entitled not to go to a shop where they don't like the views of the shopkeeper. But the planning system is not entitled to take the views of the shopkeeper into account when granting planning permission, because it's independent of political activity and should be above that. So this petition oughtn't to have any legal effect. It should be ignored by the Walthamstow Council.
It should be, but let's see what happens. I mean, I think that those who raised this petition wouldn't have made those points if they didn't think that they would have some, useful kind of echo within the chambers of the local council. I mean, they would have been advised by intelligent lawyers to make these points. You have the feeling that these are points that will, that could genuinely affect whether or not this business can open on that street.
And I bet if Girls opens up, it'll do well. It's like all these people who complain about village pubs closing, who never go into the village pub, that people don't necessarily do what they say they intend to do.
No, it's very important to be able to get a proper black Americano. And if Luke Johnson's the man delivering it, that's more important to me than what he thinks.
Quite happy with instant coffee and a cup of Altarica made by Nescafe, but never mind. In light of students recently receiving their A-level results, William Sitwell has made the case for forgetting about university altogether, attacking Mickey Mouse degrees such as contemporary circus or hand embroidery. How do you do non-hand embroidery? And argued that to get ahead, the youth should go straight into the workforce. So is there something to be said for skipping university, or is it essential for so many young people to participate in higher education? William, you went to Kent University. You did extremely well there. It set your future career. You've got friends who you had from Kent University. Wasn't it an important part of creating the William Sitwell that everyone knows?
Well, it was certainly an important part of my life. I enjoyed the degree that I went on to do, which was politics and government. I enjoyed, the friends I made who have become lifelong friends. But, I did that degree. I read that degree over 3 years at the expense of government. I didn't come out of university having sort of, drunk to a sort of level of degree level, have taken my alcohol that seriously. I didn't come out with a debt of £45,600, and I think that if you flunked your A levels, you're not getting the university place that you hoped for. My point is, don't despair, because if you can get into the workforce now, I think that it's particularly what you said this evening about, the government's new employment legislation. There is no better time to join the workforce, and particularly in one of the areas that I'm particularly interested in hospitality. Employers, restaurateurs, bars are crying out for people to enter the world of a sommelier, a baker, a manager, business, and so on. So it's a fantastic time to go into business, and rather than wasting 3 years in the bar of your local university, get into the job market, and in 3 years' time, if you start washing up tomorrow in your local hotel, you could be running a Michelin-starred restaurant in 3 years' time.
But you're saying to people who get 3 A's or 4 A's or A stars, they should go to university, it's worth their while. It's if you flunked your A levels, get into work, because getting a degree in hand crochet won't serve you any useful purpose.
It's not just because you flunked. I think that just because you've got a great degree, it doesn't mean that you should therefore go on and endlessly educate yourself, because you're still, it's hard getting work out there. And the longer you leave it these days, the bigger the debt you're going to have. I mean, I don't know how I would sleep at night with a debt of £45,600 hanging over my head. I wouldn't sleep until, the end of my life. And I think that, you should really consider, and funny enough, I wrote this piece in the Telegraph, and a friend of mine messaged me and said that he was making it very clear to his kids who are looking at university, I don't want you taking a degree unless you can actually link it to a specific job that you want to go into. And I think it is hard for young people to have to suddenly come up with this focus. Some of us are still working our way through life, working out what it is we want to do.
But do you see the value of education as per education, that the sheer intellectual interest of doing a history degree or a philosophy degree?
I do, but I also think you can do it in a much shorter space of time. I think you can, do an intensive course over a period of a year without the long holidays, without the idea of just doing one essay a week or one essay a month. I think you could probably shorten degrees, take out a lot of the socialising, and actually focus on the academic side. I also think the job market, as I said, is a more welcoming one these days. There's less bullying, and I think that you can use your holidays to educate yourself for the rest of your life. And I don't think we should just look at our lives as being education work. I think you should spend the whole of your life reading, being educated, and not thinking that you must fill your mind with this stuff and then go out and earn money.
I must confess, I've read much more since I stopped doing a history degree than when I did. But that's all from me. Coming up next, it's Patrick Christie's. Patrick, what is on your bill of fare this evening?
Well, great show, Jacob. Great house as well, by the looks of things. But the unions and the Labour Party now, is there the whiff of corruption, cronyism and scandal there that, frankly, if it was the Conservative Party, we would be hearing all about across the BBC and Sky News? Keir Starmer, well, he called protesters in Northern Ireland racist, didn't he? Meanwhile, a mother of 6 has just been sent to prison and 5 different police forces attended a rally of about 100 people against mass migration. Meanwhile, the boats are coming at record levels. I've got loads more as well, Jacob, but you'll have to tune in to find out.
Oh, it's always going to be so interesting. Patrick, everyone's going to be watching you. That's coming after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. For now, I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and as you know, the weather in Somerset has been absolutely beautiful, though earlier there was some precipitation in sight, as they say on the shipping forecast.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good evening to you. Here's your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Plenty of showers as we go through tomorrow and some blustery, gusty winds too. But before then, there's a lot of cloud, there's a lot of rain because of a frontal system that's already made its way in from the west. And as we go through the next 12 hours or so, it's going to continue to push east and southeastwards, bringing quite a wet story across many parts of England and Wales for a time, with that rain feeding into the southeast as we go through the early hours of tomorrow.